What would you do if your CEO went undercover and discovered that the very co-founder of the company was secretly tearing it apart from within? The afternoon rain poured over the city, as if the sky itself were trying to wash away something old and decaying. Heavy drops hammered down on the rusted awning of Frankie's No. 22, a long-time hot dog stand tucked quietly beneath the overpass. To most passers-by, it was just a shabby corner joint with a faded sign and dim yellow lights that looked like they might flicker out at any moment. But to Damien Cole, the man walking slowly beneath a silver-grey raincoat, this was where it all began. And maybe where all the secrets were finally coming to light. Under the alias Micah Rayner, Damien was no longer the founding CEO of the fast food chain Frankie's Fire Dogs. He was a stranger now, just a man in a low-brimmed baseball cap, cheap sunglasses, and torn jeans frayed at the knees. He stepped inside. The bell above the door jingled, a lonely sound amid the air thick with fryer grease and the damp scent of an aging stovetop. No one recognized him. No one noticed the eyes quietly scanning the fractured corners of a once glorious brand. Behind the counter stood a middle-aged man with graying hair, gripping a pair of tongs like it was second nature. His name tag read Ralph. His eyes were tired but filled with a quiet loyalty, the kind of look someone wears when they once believed a place could mean everything. Damien sat on a red stool at the counter, its cracked vinyl groaning under the weight of time and untold stories. "First time here?" Ralph asked, his voice flat. Damien nodded, keeping up a faint Midwestern accent. "Yeah. What's good?" Ralph gave a half-hearted smile. "We call the Chicago dog our signature, if you don't mind getting mustard all over your hands." Damien nodded again, adding a black coffee to his order. While Ralph turned back to the kitchen, Damien studied the space carefully, the flickering register, a tip jar with only a few crumpled bills, old posters from a campaign 2 years ago still taped to the wall. Nothing seemed wrong in the financial reports, but everything felt off. And then Ralph returned, placing a steaming hot dog in front of him. He leaned in, voice low but clear. "If you really want to know what's going on here, come back after 4. I'll tell you something I probably shouldn't know." Damien looked up, meeting his gaze. It was no longer the look of a vendor. It was the look of a witness. A man guarding a truth powerful enough to bring down an empire. And in that moment, Damien knew the hot dog before him wasn't just lunch. It was the beginning of a reckoning long overdue. The strong black coffee was still steaming as Damien raised the cup to his lips, the bitter heat brushing his tongue and pulling him back to the early days of building the business, when he stood behind the counter himself, squeezing mustard, watching the flames. Back then, Ralph had been one of the first people Damien ever hired at Frankie's, a cautious, quiet man, always on time, and never missing a shift without cause. Now, nearly 2 decades later, Ralph was still here. But what remained wasn't just loyalty. It might be something deeper. Fear. Damien scanned the room. 3 office workers had just left, leaving behind an empty space filled only with the faint tapping of rain on the awning. Ralph stepped out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a frayed towel, and suddenly placed a piece of paper in front of Damien, a faded receipt detailing industrial oven maintenance, $8,140. Damien frowned. "They replaced the entire unit, but I'm still using a makeshift clamp," Ralph said softly, tapping the scratched surface of the oven. If it had really been replaced, I wouldn't have to wire the thermostat shut with a twist tie. Damien straightened in his seat, his eyes narrowing. Did you report it through the system? Ralph gave a small nod. I sent an email, called the hotline, even mailed documents to headquarters. 3 months ago, after sending the full packet of receipts, I got back a white envelope. He reached under the counter and pulled out a thin envelope, unmarked and sealed. Damien opened it. Inside was a single printed card. The stand is already sinking. Don't stir the surface, or everything goes under with it. A chill ran down Damien's back, and it wasn't from the rain, it was from the quiet, calculated threat now staring him in the face. Ralph continued, his voice lower now. Since then, I've noticed a grey van parked across the street every morning. No plates. No consistent driver. Some days, someone just sits there, watching through the windshield. I haven't gone to the police. What would I say? That someone's skimming hot dog condiments? Damien's grip on the coffee cup tightened. He came here to investigate numbers, but instead, he'd walked into something far more dangerous. A system built not just to hide the truth, but to threaten and punish anyone who dared disturb the silence. And that meant this wasn't about a hot dog stand anymore. This was a battle. And Ralph, though tired, was the only one brave enough to sound the alarm. Outside the stand, the rain had stopped. But inside Damien, a quiet storm was beginning to rise. He leaned back slightly, eyes fixed on the white envelope on the counter, a slip of paper that seemed meaningless at first glance, yet carried a terrifying weight, like a warning crafted by someone who understood the system too well, someone skilled enough to threaten without leaving a trace. Ralph stood behind the counter, drying the tongs with slow, deliberate movements, as if trying to hold on to calm. I don't know who sent it, but I know exactly what they meant, he said, his voice steady. They don't need clubs or guns. All they have to do is make you feel helpless, make you feel watched. And from there, you choose silence on your own. Damien clenched his fist. He had once thought the issue was just about a few questionable invoices or delayed maintenance. But now it was clear there was a hand reaching deeper, a system operating in the shadows, manipulating cash flow and silencing dissent. Do you think someone inside the company is behind this? Damien asked quietly, testing the waters. Ralph hesitated for a moment, then lowered his voice. There's one name, but I can't say for sure. All the invoices go through an intermediary, Bramley Logistics. They used to just supply napkins. Now they handle deliveries, maintenance, cleaning, equipment. Ever since they came in, costs have gone up and quality's gone down. Damien froze. The name Bramley Logistics struck a disturbingly familiar chord. He searched his memory. Board meetings, strange contracts pushed through before he had a chance to review them. A web was being spun, and now it was tightening around the oldest branches, the ones rich with history and loyalty, but easiest to overlook. I know saying this might put you in a tough spot, Ralph said quietly, eyes calm. But I'm out of options. My daughter's in college. I'm supporting her on my own. If I lose this job, I lose my last chance to keep the promise I made to her mother. Damien didn't respond. He only nodded slowly, a silent vow forming within him. In that moment, he knew this investigation was no longer about auditing internal records. It was a promise to Ralph. to the others like him, and to himself, a man who once swore he would never let the system he built become a weapon for those who feed off silence. Back in the small hotel room near the train station, Damien sat in front of his laptop, the dim yellow desk lamp casting a tired glow over a face that was growing more serious by the second. The screen displayed dozens of invoice files and operational cost charts from older franchise locations, data only someone like him had access to. And just as Ralph had said, the name Bramley Logistics appeared repeatedly, quietly taking over nearly the entire supply chain. Deliveries, maintenance, cleaning services, equipment consultations. Every department had been coincidentally handed over to the same company in less than a year. Average costs had jumped by 27%. Duplicate charges appeared across 3 separate stores on the exact same day. But what made Damien freeze, eyes narrowing as if someone had punched him in the chest, was when he clicked into Bramley's legal profile. Under board members, one name stood out in stark clarity. Victor Reese. His throat went dry. Victor, the man who helped him build Frankie's from a pushcart on Magnolia Street. The man who used to shout, "We're not selling hot dogs, we're selling memories," as they queued for customers during their first freezing winter. And the man Damien had forced out of the company after a string of internal scandals, drunken outbursts at headquarters, verbal abuse towards staff, alienating key investors. Damien had made that cold decision, believing he was saving the company. But now, had he unknowingly opened the door to a storm returning from the shadows? That familiar question echoed in his mind. If not me, then who could know the system well enough to manipulate it this precisely? Now he had his answer. Victor didn't need to build a new company. All he had to do was bend the old system, the one he had helped Damien design, the one they once sketched on napkins in a Norwood bar, the one he knew to its very core. But what made Damien shudder wasn't that Victor had pulled it off. It was the fact that Victor didn't do it for money. He did it for something far more dangerous. Revenge. Damien stared silently at the screen. The pieces had all clicked into place, fitting together like a hand closing tightly around the throat of Frankie's, squeezing with every beat. And the most dangerous part? Victor didn't need to destroy it. He just needed to let it rot from the inside. That night, Damien didn't sleep. Because he understood, the battle was no longer in the kitchen, the invoices, or the ledgers. It was happening at the soul of the system. And the enemy was the man who once called him brother. The late afternoon sun bathed the upper windows of the Meridian Hotel in gold as Damien, now in the guise of Darren Fox, walked into the lobby with the calm confidence of a seasoned investor. He was no longer the man in a faded cap and weathered coat. A deep navy blazer, crisp white shirt, and a classic Patek watch on his wrist were his perfect armor for the confrontation ahead. On paper, Darren Fox was the director of an investment fund specializing in mid-tier retail acquisitions, a title convincing enough for Victor Reese to accept the meeting without hesitation. No one says no to money, especially when it comes with the promise of expanded influence. The rooftop bar was breezy, with soft jazz floating from hidden speakers as if to soothe the tension of unspoken negotiations. Damien chose a table by the railing, ordered a soda with no ice, and scanned every face emerging from the elevator. When Victor arrived, he was instantly recognizable. His walk was unhurried, his once familiar face now hardened by time and bitterness. His hair was neatly trimmed, grey at the temples, and his tailored suit spoke of a man who knew he was being watched. "Darren Fox," Victor greeted, shaking hands with a polite smile that couldn't hide the sharpness in his eyes. "I hear you're interested in supply chains." Damien responded with measured calm. "I'm not just interested in operations. I'm interested in strategy, especially the kind so subtle no one even sees it." The remark made Victor lift his gaze, his brows slightly furrowing. "I admire models that can infiltrate old systems and gain influence without needing a rebrand. Bramley Logistics, for example." The space between them thickened. Victor blinked, then quickly regained composure. "You know quite a bit." Damien smiled. "Not as much as someone who helped design the system." Victor gave a short laugh. "I won't deny it. But I didn't break it. I just adjusted it to serve the right people." "Serve," Damien echoed, "or drain." In that instant, he pulled out a small recorder, placed it on the table, and hit play. Victor's voice from moments earlier echoed back. "I just adjusted it to serve the right people." At the same moment, two men at the next table, wearing black suits, no drinks, approached and flashed federal investigator badges. "Victor Reese, you are under arrest for system manipulation and financial fraud." Victor jumped up, but his wrist was quickly restrained. He glared at Damien, growling, "You set me up." Damien rose slowly, retrieving the recorder. "No," he said quietly, his gaze like a cold blade. "I just held up a mirror. You're the one who chose to look." And as Victor was led past the glittering tables and the quiet hum of conversation, Damien remained standing, not as a victor, but as a man who survived a dream betrayed. The next morning, Ameu stood at the podium inside the headquarters of Frankie's for a hastily organized press conference. There were no sponsors, no commercial backdrops, only a simple banner behind him that read, "Frankie's, built by hands, kept alive by heart." In front of him were hundreds of employees, supervisors and store managers, people who had long believed they were nothing more than tiny cogs in a massive machine. But today, they watched the founder step forward and admit something few in his position ever would. "I allowed this system to be infiltrated, and I am sorry." His voice did not waver, but the weight in his eyes said it all. He announced 3 major reforms: a $25 million reinvestment package for the long-neglected legacy locations, a scholarship fund named the Stand Fund for employees' children, and most importantly, the creation of the Chef's Council, a leadership body made up of front-line workers empowered with real voting rights on operational policies. Before the room could even react, he turned to the right side of the stage and raised his hand. Ralph stepped forward. He was no longer in an apron, no longer holding tongs, but dressed in a crisp navy blazer with the words "Legacy Lead, Frankie's number 22, embroidered over the chest. When Damien handed him a new contract, naming him Senior Field Advisor, the entire room rose in applause. No one had known who Ralph really was beyond a faded name on the schedule board. But now he stood for something far greater: loyalty, truth, and a belief that never died. And yet, amid the thunderous applause, only Damien truly understood the silence waiting on the other side. Because he knew this was just the beginning. Victor's network had embedded itself far too deep, and uprooting it would require something stronger than the law itself. Unity from the very people once dismissed as just cogs. That morning, under the gaze of hundreds, Damien Cole was no longer a CEO. He was a craftsman, repairing the dream he had once let slip through his fingers. 48 hours after the press conference, while the media frenzy had yet to cool, Damien quietly returned to Frankie's number 122. No one knew. There were no film crews, no reporters waiting outside. In his hand was just a paper bag of onions, a white apron, and a pair of rubber gloves. Ralph was already there, the kitchen light casting his shadow on the wall like an old streak of smoke. When he saw Damien walk in, he looked up and squinted. "Back so soon? Thought you'd be at headquarters." Damien smiled, hanging his coat on a hook. "Not today. Today I'm the trainee. If I'm going to rebuild from the ground up, I need to remember where the ground begins." Ralph raised an eyebrow. "The ground, huh? Then I hope you're ready to get oil splattered in the face." They both laughed, not the polite chuckle of a boss and his employee, but the knowing laughter of two men who had survived a quiet storm and were rediscovering their place in a cramped kitchen. They got to work prepping the morning shift, slicing onions, firing up the grill, checking ingredients, adjusting oven temps. Damien fumbled with the pickles, his hands shook as he drizzled mustard on the bun, but each motion carried a determination that needed no explanation. That whole morning, there were no complaints, no phone calls, no titles, just the clatter of tools, the aroma of grilled meat, and the quiet sense that something was being mended. Near midday, Ralph returned with 2 cups of hot coffee, handed one to Damien, and said softly, "Janie called last night. She cried when she heard about the scholarship. She said, 'Dad, you didn't just keep me in school. You showed me that justice isn't just a word in a book.'" Damien stayed quiet, his hand tightening around the cup, eyes distant. It wasn't the gratitude that struck him, but the realization that this fight, with all its cruelty and wreckage, had reached something he'd once forgotten. People. Not figures, not chairs, but those behind the counter, wearing gloves, slicing onions and living with dignity. And in that moment, Damien understood he hadn't come back just to make amends. He was staying to begin again with them. For the next 3 days, Damien blended into the rhythm of Frankie's number 22 like a true part-time worker. He repaired a shorted outlet behind the counter, replaced a leaking water line under the sink, and inspected the aging refrigeration unit in the back. Each task was both a fix and a disguise, allowing him to observe without drawing attention. And the deeper he looked, the more familiar shadows began to surface. In the storage room, Damien found a folder tucked behind a spice rack, handwritten in red ink, documenting delivery invoices that didn't match. The quantities ordered and received differed by tens of %. Some items had installation fees charged, but had never actually been installed. More concerning, 3 separate technical inspection reports bore identical signatures from someone who didn't exist on any employee roster. He began mapping the entire flow of data on a whiteboard. Who approved, who transferred, who signed off. The name Bramley Logistics kept appearing over and over, like a fingerprint left at every scene. But what truly chilled him was the employee transfer list from Bramley to Frankie's over the past 18 months. Nearly 40 individuals, evenly spread across departments: operations, accounting, logistics, maintenance. A systematic infiltration, so carefully designed that every discrepancy was just small enough to avoid audit suspicion. This was no longer fraud. This was an internal takeover. And behind it, still, was Victor, not wielding a hammer, but a scalpel. Not smashing, but silently draining the system. And if no one stopped him, the company would collapse like a body suffering internal bleeding, never realizing what had gone wrong until it was too late. That afternoon, when the Bramley truck pulled up once again in front of Frankie's number 22, Damien didn't need to look at the invoice to know something was off. The delivery man was the same one with the familiar oak tree tattoo, muttering into his phone the same phrase Damien had heard before. "The plumber's still there." It wasn't a throwaway comment. It was a signal. Victor knew he hadn't left. That night, Damien sat alone in the break room, holding an old photo in his hand. Two men standing beside their first hot dog cart, grinning like the future was just around the corner. One was him, the one who built the standards. The other was Victor, the one with foi, but no control. 12 years ago, they were co-founders. Now Victor was the one hollowing everything out from the inside. The next morning, Damien laid the entire investigation file on the table in front of Ralph, no longer hiding anything. "I need your help," he said. Ralph looked at him for a long time before saying just one sentence. "I've never left this place in 15 years. I'm not leaving it today." And in that look, Damien understood. Trust may crack, but as long as someone is willing to stand beside you, the dream isn't dead yet. The next morning, the sky was quietly clear as Damien returned to Frankie's number 22 with nothing but a bag of onions and an apron slung over his shoulder. Ralph was already there, standing behind the counter as if nothing had ever happened, slicing onions with steady hands and focused eyes. Damien walked in with a smile, no longer a CEO, no longer the man running a multi-million-dollar chain, but simply someone relearning how to wrap memories into a single hot dog. They didn't speak much, letting the sounds of the kitchen, the fire, and the running water tell the stories words couldn't express. When they paused for a break, Ralph handed Damien a cup of coffee, then said slowly, "Janie called last night. She said thank you, not for the scholarship, but because now she believes justice isn't just something you read about in textbooks." Damien nodded silently. When the finished hot dog was placed on the counter, Ralph took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, then gave a soft smile. "Not bad. Could use a little more mustard, but the heart's in the right place." They sat side by the window, watching people begin to pass by. And in that quiet moment of calm, Damien knew. Some things don't need saving. They just need to be remembered. A business doesn't collapse in a single day. It cracks slowly from the smallest things. A broken light bulb ignored. A fake invoice no one questions. But those same small things, when seen through the eyes of someone who truly cares, can become the starting point of a revival. Damien's story isn't just about exposing a scheme. It's a reminder that truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs someone willing to listen. If you believe that justice can start with a hot dog and an honest word, make sure to like and subscribe so you won't miss more stories like this. And don't forget to comment with the phrase, "Keep it right," because change begins the moment we dare to call it by its name.